If you've been keeping up with video game news these past few days, you'll know that games industry executives have been saying a lot of stupid crap these past few days. EA in particular came under the limelight after their laughable attempt to rebrand loot boxes as surprise mechanics during a UK Parliament hearing, and they were hoping that this would somehow work, which I'm still baffled by. They actually think they can get away with unethical practices by simply giving them another name. I mean, on top of all that, when told about mounting evidence that there's a link between loot boxes and gambling, EA VP of Legal and Government Affairs, Carrie Hopkins, responded by saying that she just disagrees with the evidence.
And we also disagree that there's evidence that shows it leads to gambling.
Okay, let's get something straight. You don't disagree with evidence, you have to refute it. You go in there and you present your own evidence, your own data, studies, research, whatever, and try to counter that evidence with your own. But of course, the reason EA isn't countering with evidence is because they just don't have any. Otherwise, they would have presented something by now. It's because they don't have evidence that they're doing desperate things like trying to name loot boxes surprise mechanics, insisting that loot boxes aren't gambling, and they just expect us to take their word for it. They think we're morons. Beyond loot boxes, EA and Epic were also inquired about topics like average playtime, game addiction, excessive spending in games, and what either company is doing to responsibly mitigate potential unhealthy habits with their games. Both companies basically brushed aside any responsibility they have towards caring for consumers in front of the Parliament. They flat out admitted that they haven't put any time into keeping track of these potentially unhealthy habits. They just kept repeating the same vague nonsense about how all their games are designed to be fun and consumer-friendly, but when asked for specific examples of measures they're taking to ensure their games are consumer-friendly, they had nothing of substance to say. Also, I should point out this one rich bit in which Epic actually tried to claim that they aren't a company that makes money from people playing games. They actually said that.
I would disagree with the statement that Epic makes money from people playing it. The games, the Battle Royale mode is free to play, so people playing it doesn't.
You're not charity, are you? You're not creating a free-to-play game for the joy of it.
Correct.
You don't make money out of it. I mean, you're nothing wrong with being a commercial entity, but let's not beat around the bush. You make money out of people playing the game.
Yes.
You can challenge that if you like, but that is the reality of the situation.
Then there's, of course, the article from Game Daily featuring none other than Andrew Wilson, where he kept insisting that loot boxes, or mystery boxes as he rebranded them here, have no link to gambling, that they're more like collectible baseball cards, that there's no sleight of hand going on with EA and their loot boxes, a laughable claim, all while scapegoating responsibility to parents and flimsy parental tools rather than looking introspectively at his company's own actions. But it's not just Epic and EA who have been spouting a whole lot of nonsense. Take-Two and Microsoft have joined the fray. The following information comes from an article by Business Insider. It's titled, "The Video Game Industry is Facing Government Scrutiny Over Loot Boxes, and the Most Powerful Leaders in Gaming Are Divided Over What to Do." The article began by summarizing the contention surrounding loot boxes before quoting Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick. When asked about his thoughts on the notion that loot boxes equate to gambling, here's what he had to say. "Gambling is quite different. The money comes in for entertainment and doesn't go back out. What makes gambling a very serious mechanic is the fact that money can come in and out." Yeah, that claim is plain and simply false. There are plenty of games out there that allow you to cash out in-game purchases obtained via paid loot boxes. Games like Counter-Strike, PUBG, Dota 2, and Team Fortress 2 are just a few of the major titles featuring a marketplace where players can literally gamble, trade, and cash out. Some of these in-game items actually go for thousands of dollars. Even FIFA has a way to cash out, even if not directly sanctioned by EA. These third-party gambling sites use FIFA and its Ultimate Team card packs as a platform to make cashing out possible. This doesn't apply to all games though, of course. There are games out there with paid loot boxes whose rewards are strictly confined to the game, but that doesn't change the fact that plenty of people out there put tremendous value in in-game items. The argument that Strauss Zelnick is making here is that money is more desirable, ergo slot machines which reward money is gambling, whereas loot boxes boxes, which only reward digital goods, aren't. But Straw Zelnick is vastly downplaying or is being willfully ignorant about how much value people can place in these virtual worlds and on in-game items, on gameplay goals that are facilitated through payment. He's underselling how dedicated people can become to video games. Companies do know this. They do know about certain players' extensive habits. That's what makes games so monetizable. That's what makes loot boxes so exploitable and profitable. The article then proceeded to convey sentiments conveyed by ESA CEO Stanley Pierre-Louis, who made the same tired argument that multiple countries have examined and dismissed the idea that loot boxes are gambling. EA's VP of Legal and Government Affairs also said something to that effect during her hearing in front of the UK Parliament.
Belgium and Netherlands have taken a different view from every other gambling commission in the world.
I'll say this again, just because the law of a country hasn't caught up to new and emerging antics doesn't make those antics ethical. There was a time when there was no law against slavery or against women not having the right to vote, but that certainly doesn't make those norms ethical. Similarly, just because loot boxes don't fit the definition of gambling in certain countries yet, doesn't mean new laws can't be established or that the current law can't be extrapolated upon to mitigate rising concerns about these predatory monetization practices. To show you what I mean, the UK's Gambling Commission said that they don't see loot boxes as fitting the legal definition of gambling in their country, but guess what? The UK is still holding a hearing with companies like EA and Epic to scrutinize them and determine how to move forward. Just because they have ruled out loot boxes as legally gambling doesn't mean that they aren't concerned and pursuing legislative avenues. I'll actually read a few excerpts from the UK Gambling Commission's deliberation on loot boxes from back in November 2017 to highlight this point. So right here it does say, a key factor in deciding if that line has been crossed is whether in-game items acquired via a game of chance can be considered money or money's worth. In practical terms, this means that where in-game items obtained via loot boxes are confined for use within the game and cannot be cashed out, it is unlikely to be caught as a licensable gambling activity. In those cases, our legal powers would not allow us to step in. So that's one part, but the second part is important, which reads, however, many parents are not interested in whether an activity meets a legal definition of gambling. Their main concern is whether there is a product out there that could present a risk to their children. We are concerned with the growth in examples where the line between video gaming and gambling is becoming increasingly blurred. Where it does meet the definition of gambling, it is our job to ensure that children are protected, and we have lots of rules in place, like age verification requirements, to do that. Where a product does not meet that test to be classed as gambling, but could potentially cause harm to children, parents will undoubtedly expect proper protections to be put in place by those that create, sell, and regulate those products. We have a long track record in keeping children safe, and we are keen to share our experiences and expertise with others that have a similar responsibility. Whether gambling or not, we all have a responsibility to keep children and young people safe. In other words, they can't currently interfere from the legal standpoint of gambling, but that doesn't mean they're just going to sit on their asses and pretend loot boxes aren't an issue. It's such a common excuse from gaming companies to say, well, it's not the law, but just because you happen to come up with a scummy scheme the law has yet to consider doesn't make the scheme not scummy. The Business Insider article then highlighted U.S. Senator Hawley's recent new bill proposing restrictions on loot boxes in the United States, which recently gained bipartisan support. The article then reminisced on how controversy surrounding Mortal Kombat's violence and potential government intervention there led to the establishment of the ESRB way back when. After which, the article then transcribed yet another quote from Zelnick that reads, "We comply with the law, we'll comply with the law here." Basically, they'll only do the ethical thing if the law interferes, if there's government regulation. They're not going to try to determine for themselves whether actions they're taking is ethical. If they can manage to circumvent the law, then who cares? That's pretty much their stance. And this was a point raised by the UK Parliament during their hearing with EA and Epic.
The response of your company would be that a government would have to make a ruling and legislate against something before you will take action.
I think that's a really broad mischaracterization. So, we had 2 regulators in 2 countries who, under their local laws, had an interpretation of the law. One, we ultimately decided to make a change in our game for business reasons. The other, we are still in discussions both directly and with the industry because we disagree with the interpretation the regulator has made.
EA insisted that this was a mischaracterization, but it really isn't. It was only after Belgium deemed FIFA's Ultimate Team card packs as violating the country's gambling laws that EA decided to remove them from the game. And recall that initially EA actually tried to fight the Belgian Gambling Commission and take them to court in an attempt to keep loot boxes in FIFA purchasable, but eventually they caved. They removed the ability to purchase the card packs, and that was that. So for companies like EA, even when the law comes after them, they might not accept that deliberation. They might say something along the lines of, "Oh, we don't agree with the interpretation of the law." That's how 2K also put it when their sports titles had to remove the ability to purchase loot boxes in Belgium and Netherlands. So yeah, it's clear that the gaming industry will remain stubborn about their anti-consumer gold mines, that they won't regulate themselves, that they think they're above responsibility and accountability. So it should come as no surprise that government bodies seeing this are becoming more and more interested about stepping in themselves. Moving on, the next spokesperson the Business Insider article highlighted was none other than Phil Spencer, head of Xbox. On the topic of loot boxes and encroaching regulation, here's what he had to say. As I look at some of the legislation, I think we have a lot of education to do in certain places. When I sit down with people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, who maybe aren't in the industry and are painting with a broad brush with what I think is kind of a specific term, I think we should educate our customers on what is in a game and how the monetization in that game works. Phil then proceeded by proposing that we should let the ESRB take care of things, stating, quote, "We can continue to expand our ESRB definitions. There are monetization descriptions that happen in the ESRB." Yeah, except the ESRB has been absolutely useless when it comes to communicating to consumers about products with gambling-like elements. The only so-called solution that the ratings board has come up with is adding this in-game purchases label to any game with any kind of extra purchases. This label is so broad in its definition that it doesn't help differentiate between less predatory forms of monetization, like reasonably priced and sizable DLCs and expansions, versus things like glorified gambling loot boxes. What Phil is proposing here is like saying that more dangerous substances like cocaine and meth should be sold alongside far less dangerous ones like marijuana as long as they're all labeled drug. The ESRB knows that the in-game purchases label is an ineffective way to communicate the potential harm of certain games designed around certain monetization schemes like loot boxes. Their goal isn't to actually introduce a solution, it's to brush aside scrutiny by insisting that loot boxes aren't gambling and by pretending to be proactive via these ineffective solutions to keep up with appearances. Despite their own rating systems stipulating games with real-life gambling should be rated as adults only, they refuse to scrutinize games featuring glorified gambling as such, and they do this by insisting that loot boxes and gambling aren't the same thing, when in essence they really are. The reasons behind this are clear. The ESRB is a subdivision of the ESA. The ESA is lobbied by the games industry's richest publishers and executives, and both the ESA and the games industry stand to make billions by keeping loot boxes in play. Worth noting is that both Strauss Zelnick and Phil Spencer are members of the ESA's board of directors. So when the perpetrators are the heads of their own industry's regulatory organization, how can anyone expect that self-regulation will be done fairly when it's the top games industry executives frothing at the monetization potential of loot boxes running the show? Does anyone really expect that the ESA will scrutinize these executives and companies fairly? It's like expecting that a law enforcement organization run by the mafia will do anything tangible about the mafia. When it's the greedy publishers and executives who are policing themselves, of course they'll let themselves get away with greedy antics. Of course they'll put out propaganda claiming loot boxes aren't gambling, or that loot boxes aren't even loot boxes, but rather surprise mechanics, or mystery boxes that are fun and ethical and like Kinder eggs. Of course the ESRB won't fulfill their own guidelines when it comes to adult-rated games. The article finally concluded with a few more quotes from Straw Zelnick, which read, quote, "If our consumers indicated that they really need to know what kind of mechanics exist before they buy a game, then it would be appropriate for the ESRB to establish those kind of criteria. But I don't think that's the case." That's not the case, he says. He doesn't think that people want to know monetization mechanics that exist in games before we buy them. Are you fucking kidding me? Do you know how often gamers ask for video game studios and companies to disclose their monetization schemes, odds, progression, and rewards rates before a game comes out? How many times has a game company waited until critics have given glowing reviews about a game before releasing an update that implements crippling monetization? Straw Zelnick continued, "The US government is not going to regulate what monetization mechanics exist inside a video game. That's just not going to happen. That would just be horrible law in a country that has the First Amendment, so I don't believe that will happen." Yes, Straws Zelnick, preying on consumers through insidious monetization tactics is totally the same thing as freedom of speech. That totally falls under the protection of the First Amendment. This is about as bad as EA's laughable attempt to rebrand loot boxes as surprise mechanics. How do you plead to accusations of murder? Not guilty. The knife in his guts, that's my way of communicating that I hate the guy's guts. It's communication, it's freedom of speech. Security footage shows you were behind that bank robbery from last night. Anything you have to say about that? Hey man, what you saw last night was just interpretive dancing with a few props involved. It's freedom of expression. Seriously, Straw Zelnick? First Amendment, that's the best excuse you got for your ethically reprehensible practices, for the games industry's reprehensible practices? Is that how desperate we have become to stave off scrutiny? Again, this is how low executives think of consumers. They think they can say some dumb, parody-level shit like this and expect us to fall in line like cattle. The more they open their mouths, the clearer it becomes that they don't have any actual, valid, reasonable arguments or justifications beyond wanting to make more money. And government bodies are not dumb. The UK Parliament could see right through those testimonies and that hearing.
Surprise mechanics.
And they can certainly see right through the bullshit that Straw Zelnick is spouting here. After that humiliating display by EA and Epic in front of the UK Parliament, yeah, more government bodies around the world are becoming aware of how full of shit the games industry is right now. It's definitely easy to laugh at the nonsense that EA, Epic, Take-Two, and to some extent Microsoft now is spouting, but when you actually think about what's going on here, the gaming industry is making an ass of itself in front of all of these government bodies. It's giving the government more ammo to go in there, break the doors down, step in, and do what they have to do to keep these guys in check. And who's to say what other adverse effects that might have, where else they might reach in the gaming industry, where else they might want to impose further regulation. Everything would calm down if the games industry went back to making games and not money-milking machines disguised as games. But from the sound of things, that's just not going to happen. They're going to keep making excuses. They're going to keep trying to sidestep the issue rather than address it directly, pretend like they care, offer ineffective solutions, so on and so forth. This is the bet the games industry is making, and they're gonna lie in it. So yeah, there you have it, folks. These are one man's thoughts and opinions about the present situation and what it might mean for the future. I'd love to know what your take is on all of this in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.